Daniel McDonald.
Thank you, Robert. I want to add one thing really quick. There are a lot of people involved in the research work that we're doing. I'm by no means just the core. There's a lot of core developers. So by the end of this talk, my hope is that you will want to send me your poop. The reason is that I'm working on a project called the American Gut. It's a global research project. And we are interested in looking at the types of organisms that live inside of you. And it turns out that poop is an excellent proxy for what is present in your large intestine. Here's some of them. Those little bacteria, they're just hanging out. It's beautiful, right? They're just hanging out, munching on some nice little piece of plant fibers there. Most bacteria in the world are not harmful to humans. There are a couple bacteria that are bad, and they kind of give a bad name to this entire domain of life, which is unfortunate. Here's one of them, Clostridium difficile. This is also known as C. diff. This is a very nasty pathogen. It's responsible for upwards of 15,000 to 30,000 deaths in the United States alone. One of the common ways that you can get C. diff is by spending a long time in the hospital if you're taking a heavy amount of antibiotics. And if you pick up C. diff in that context, you might become sick. And if you become sick, the next step of treatment is a lot more antibiotics, a giant war on your bacteria for months. And during this time, if you have C. diff, you might be going to the bathroom up to 30 times a day, let alone you might die. This is a very, very bad thing. What I find remarkable about this, though, is that I might have C. diff. I spent a lot of energy growing up finding interesting ways to go to the hospital for really long periods of time. And I might have picked up C. diff, but I have healthy bacteria that live inside of me. And medical research is beginning to pick up on this idea that if you have healthy organisms that live inside of you, they might protect you against disease. I'll leave it up to your guys' imagination as exactly how these types of transplants are performed. But the idea is relatively simple. If we can restore healthy organisms into the gut, can we bring balance back? There's a recent clinical trial that was performed to study the effectiveness of fecal transplants in C. diff cases. And the researchers who were running the study decided that they had to stop the study prematurely because they realized it was unethical to withhold this treatment option to C. diff patients because it was that effective. 90 to 95% of the cases they were able to recover. And relief came very fast in the order of a couple of days as opposed to a couple of months. But there's an important conceptual shift here in that if we begin to look at our gut microbiome, the organisms that live inside of us, as a garden, if we find some invader, we don't just want to nuke the whole place. You don't nuke your backyard when you find a weed. You figure out some way to control and contain the invaders. So really what we're making is this shift from this war on bacteria to trying to figure out if we can harmonize instead with the ecosystem. And coincidentally, this is one of the rare cases where economists are actually in line with reality, this concept that perhaps microbes are an intimate part of the human experience. This also begs the question, how human are we? So if you look in the mirror, if you were able to zoom in really close, right on your cheek, you'd see all kinds of microbes just hanging out in the surface, little bacteria. These things are good for you. They're communicating back and forth with your body, letting you know when some types of pathogens are hanging out. But the cheek is just one environment of many. Here's another two, your mouth and your large intestine. What's interesting about these environments is that they're directly connected. But the types of life that live in your mouth versus the types of life that live in your gut are more different from an ecological perspective than the life that lives in a Colorado plateau versus the life that lives in the Amazonian jungle. But back to how human are we? So you have about 10 trillion cells in your body that are human. They have human DNA. You have about 100 trillion cells in your body that are not human. And represented within this 100 trillion cells, even though it's 100 trillion cells, they tend to be a lot smaller. So that's why, if you look in the mirror, you don't see, some giant bacterium sticking off your face or whatever. But they weigh about 3 pounds. They do make a substantial amount of your body mass. These small little microbes. And represented within this 100 trillion cells is about a couple thousand species, some of which are more divergent from each other, or some of which are divergent from each other by about 1 billion years. And what that actually means is that some of these bacteria are more different from each other than you are from this velociraptor, which is pretty impressive, right? There's a lot of cool stuff going on inside of you. So at this point, some of you might be wondering, why wasn't this in my high school textbook or my college biology book? So we've only been able to really dig deep and look at the types of life that are present, that live on and inside of humans, thanks to relatively recent improvements in molecular techniques and DNA sequencing technologies. But these microbes are also not just hanging out, sitting idly by, protecting occasionally from C. diff. They actually extend what our bodies can do dramatically at the gene level. They offer about 150 times more genes than we have provided by our own genome. Some of these genes, in all fairness, are dedicated for keeping the organisms alive, helping like this individual bacteria replicate. But a lot of these other functions are dedicated for things like vitamin synthesis, helping to break down those complex plant fibers like we saw earlier. Some of them are also implicated in helping to train the immune system when we're born and when we're first picking up our first individual microbes. And we're discovering that dysbioses or alterations in the types of life that we have are very strongly associated with things like autism, obesity, intestinal bowel disease, multiple sclerosis. And it could actually be the case, for instance, David, that your microbes told you to drink your coffee last night. There's a lot of interesting connections. There's more serotonin in your gut than anywhere else in your body. And your microbes produce a lot of it. Sorry. And so, I'm getting tossed up with my slides. So hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent on this research because we're seeing a lot of very interesting implications of what's going on. However, if you are interested in the types of life that live on you and inside of you, it is very difficult to participate in these projects because they're very focused on particular diseases. And so Jeff Leach, the founder of Naked Pizza, and who has a very personal interest in microbiome research, got together with Dr. Rob Knight, who is a world-recognized microbiome researcher, and formed the American Gut Project that has a zero exclusion criteria. If you want to participate, you can. Doesn't matter. And along the way, they got another 30 people or so involved, well-recognized microbiome researchers to join the project and back it. And these guys range from medical doctors to biologists, to biochemists, to ecologists, to computer scientists. And the idea here is very simple. Your donations fund the expensive molecular procedures and the DNA sequencing that needs to go on. And in return, we send you a sample. And you can rub that little sample on a used piece of toilet paper, and you send it back to us. And we ask you to fill out a questionnaire. Things about your lifestyle, your diet, because no one knows how lifestyle and diet actually affect the nature of your microbes. And what we'll also do is once we process that sample, we will send you a list of what your dominant organisms are, how you compare to the rest of what we know about humans, and also where your microbes are also found anywhere else on the planet. All of the research that we are doing are protected or approved by the University of Colorado's Institutional Review Board, which governs any human subjects research study. So that what we're doing here is entirely approved through the formal human subject research processes. Once the data is collected, we will de-identify it, and we will make it openly and publicly available, freely available, so that any other microbiome research work going on in the world can take advantage of it. The reason here that's very powerful is that since we don't know what the background of the human microbiome actually looks like, it's really hard to put a diseased individual in the context of what humans actually look like. We don't want just healthy people. We want to see what everybody looks like. Well, there's one other interesting component to this, though. It's designed to enable the citizen scientist. We want to know what you are interested in. So I personally donated at the level of what's called the week of feces. What I'm going to get are 7 samples back. And I really love spicy food. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat just a regular diet for a few days, no spice. And then after a few days, I'm going to switch over. I'm going to eat the exact same foods. I'm going to start loading on the cayenne pepper and really make myself sweat. And maybe we'll see some type of change, maybe we won't. But if we see a change and if it's interesting, we can then write a more targeted and specific grant and dig in and look at the biology. But this is an excellent opportunity for anyone else in the public who has some type of interesting question about their microbiome to just go and play and see what happens. Now, this project so far has been made possible by the over 3,500 people who have made donations through the crowdfunding site Indiegogo.com, where we're still accepting participants. And this talk was the product of a lot of feedback from very close friends, colleagues, and family, and the opportunity to speak at TED has been absolutely fantastic. But I'd like to end by saying that if you are interested in the American Gut Project, all you need to do is go to Google and just Google American Gut. It'll be the first links that come up. But I really hope that everyone in here decides that it would be fun to poop in the name of science.